Hey, and welcome to 3 Audiobook Review. It is a series on my channel where I listen to 3 audiobooks and review them. This time, I will be looking at Dark Rooms by Lynda Plante. What else am I looking at? The Night Shift by Alex Finlay, and last but not least, The Book of Cold Cases by Simone St. James. First up, we'll be looking at The Night Shift by Alex Finlay. The Night Shift is a whodunit mystery thriller looking at... what the heck is it about now again? Oh my goodness. It takes place in a small town in New York, close to New York, where a long time ago, 15 years ago to be precise, a mass murder took place in a Blockbusters, and one of the girls who were targeted survived. And now, 15 years later, the story starts off with another similar mass murder in a ice cream parlor, and a lot of girls died, but one once again survived. So our story starts as the survivor of the previous incident. I think her name is Claire or something like that. But she, the OG survivor, is called to the hospital because the new survivor, her name is Jessie, she refuses to speak to anyone else, and the police want answers, and they call her in because she's uniquely equipped to understand what Jessie is going through, having survived the death of 4 of her friends or her peers when she was in high school. The story then looks at who done it, what happened. We look at Jessie's accounts. There are 3 POVs, one of a district attorney. Who else? There's the original survivor, and we also get the perspective of a detective who happens to be pregnant in this whole murder investigation that can get people in trouble a lot of times. But yes, she goes through it, and she's, it's just a regular detective-based police investigative mystery thriller where she's looking at clues, looking at the suspects, and trying to uncover what exactly happened on that night. We also have 2 timelines because, while we are exploring and investigating the current whodunit situation, we're still going back in time to see what happened the first time and what were the events that led to the girls being murdered. Now, throughout the story, Alex Finlay has put together a bunch of mysteries and a bunch of a lot of intrigue that kind of kept me guessing and kept me wondering, and kept me invested in where the story was going. But in the end, they were all kind of disappointing. I just felt like there was so much build up and so much attention paid to these little thread lines that kind of led nowhere. And so because of that, I kind of gave this 2 stars. The characters were a bit meh. I wasn't really invested in them that much, and while the writing was solid and it followed the normal murder mystery things and there was that bit of intrigue, I just wasn't that invested in the characters. You, however, might be, so if you like a good little murder mystery whodunit. I think I was just annoyed by the fact that it could have gone in so many interesting directions. There could have been so many, there were amazing reveals, don't get me wrong. There were some awesome twists and reveals that I didn't see coming that were very cool. It's just the possibilities of what could have been might have been better. It's like when you open a present and you're expecting something spectacular, and what you get is something mundane instead. anything else you get is gonna be not as good. Someone's dangling diamonds in front of your eyes and then you're actually getting actual carrots. It's a big difference. Anyway, so other than that, it was a decent story, and I'll probably pick up another Alex Finlay audiobook in the future, but for this one it was a 2. Next up we have Dark Rooms. I was gifted this book by Jonathan Ball Publishers. Thank you very much for this lovely copy. Dark Rooms by Lynda, Plante, I think that's how you say her name. It follows another detective murder mystery, but this time it is set in London. So our hero or heroine, Jane Tennyson, she has just been promoted to detective something. She's a DI or a detective investigator or something, and she's being placed into a different unit in a different station. So it's kind of like a new start for her. She's in a new apartment and she's busy decorating her new apartment and redecorating her new apartment, getting new tiles and plumbing and sorting out all of that mundane stuff in life. But then there's also this murder mystery that she needs to solve in her new role. Now, what's interesting is that this novel is it is the 8th book in a series in the Jane Tennyson thriller series. But the amazing thing that Lynda does is that she kind of makes it a standalone. So within the broader Tennyson world, you can kind of read this as a standalone and walk away with it without feeling the need to read the prequels or continue on with the series. Like, you can just read this one, you can just read Dark Rooms and find it satisfying or disappointing or whatever your cup of tea is, and then continue on about your way, which is kind of cool. I think that a lot of serialized stories, especially mystery thrillers, they kind of do that, where they leave you on the edge of your seat because, you know, there isn't another book coming in the series, but it has to be done in such a way that readers can jump into the series at any point without feeling like, oh my goodness, I have to go back and actually read that. Fantasy, you know, trilogies and duologies aren't necessarily that way, because obviously the two thingies tie into one another and you kind of need to know what happened before in order to read the next thing. But yeah, Lynda was really good at creating this thing that can stand on its own, which is awesome. So in terms of that aside, what happens in the thing? So Jane is starting at this new place. It is set in 1985, and she is, you know, a woman in a very male-dominated place. It is one of the first times when women were allowed to become detectives and they were taken into the police force in London. It's kind of set against that backdrop, and so we have our character facing a lot of misogyny. There are, you know, certain stereotypes that she has to come against, where especially like the men who are kind of her seniors in this new station, they don't necessarily play well with her, and there's like a little bit of antagonism between herself and I think a few of the other women in the story, specifically like the PA at the news station. There are like some vibes there, but nevertheless, like, she's very good at her job, and she has her own flaws, which I think is some of the issues that I had with this book are like rooted in the fact that Jane obviously has some character growth that needs to happen in the next book, and that kind of came at the expense of this one. Now, the story within itself was very, very good. It was high paced and it follows this ancient, like family home, like family mansion with all its secret tunnels and even family secrets. And we look at uncovering like some of the mysteries from this one family who own this place and are now selling their place. And when a construction team comes to just bulldoze the property, they find these bodies that have been dead for years. And Jane and her team are tasked, obviously, to discover who did it, who these people are, and to give them dignity in the end, regardless of whether, you know, they've been dead for 30 years or they've been dead for 5 years. That's Jane's entire motivation behind hunting down the killers for these women and finding out, are they both women? I don't know. But finding out who these people are and what their stories are, and her entire motivation is the fact that, you know, human beings demand dignity, and if someone killed a person, that person should be brought to justice, whether this case has been cold for like a million years or not. And I think that's something that really, really is nice about her. The pacing was awesome, and the author did this really cool technique where she divided up the cases into 2 sections, where the first one went by very quickly, things happened efficiently, and you get that satisfaction of things moving along, which in mystery thrillers, especially in detective ones, doesn't always happen because, you know, the book has to book, the writer needs to fill 300 words, and so, you know, things get misplaced, people suddenly suck at their jobs, and, you know, the story has a story. So you have the satisfaction of things just happening very quickly within the first, I think, third of the book. And then the pace starts to slow down. But by then, you're so invested in everything and you kind of want to see all the dots connect that, like, I found myself just turning the pages and reading and wanting to get to the end. The audiobook is also really well narrated. I liked I can't remember who the narrator was. I listened to it on Audible, and it was so beautifully narrated. Like the accent and getting the different voices for different characters was also just kind of incredible. Like having their accents, and especially in London being such a class system where depending on where you are, your accent sounds different. You might sound more posh, you might not, and that is an aspect that I didn't have without the audiobook, and it kind of increased the enjoyment of the story for me. I did not like the ending that much, and it's kind of common. Whenever I read books, it's kind of common for me to not like the ending. But it's not necessarily how it ended. It's not necessarily what the end was, but just how everything was tied up. Like I mentioned, there were certain things that were just like dragged on for the sake of Jane's character development that weren't really necessary, or the payoff for it was underwhelming or something like that. Or there'd be instances where someone like just breaks into an apartment and they're trying to kill someone to cover something up, and then like 2 pages later everyone's having tea, even though, you know, people just wanted to kill you. Now they're having tea telling you all their secrets and why they wanted to kill you and all that jazz. But yeah, there's I definitely recommend this. There's a lot that happens in it, and Lynda is such a skillful writer that I'll probably try one of her books again in the future, but I gave this one 3 stars. Finally, we come to the third audiobook, and this is, I don't know if it's on the shortlist for the Goodreads Choice Awards, definitely, but it is The Book of Cold Cases by Simone and James, yes. So the Book of Cold Cases is another whodunit, but this time we're not following detectives. We are following a blogger. Again, I have no idea what her name is, but she is a true crime blogger, and she has this little small cult following. And one day she actually meets one of the women, one of the most notorious serial killers from her little town. And the book is written so beautifully, like just the prose and the way Simone St. James just describes the settings, the characters, motivation, the way she builds everything is just so beautifully done that it it gave me chills reading it. It was like it's a book that I would read again. There's this scene in the opening where they're describing this mansion where most of the plot takes place in this specific mansion where our serial killer, the renowned, world famous serial killer, where she lived, and she still lives in that house. Her dad was murdered there. Her mom, I think her mom was killed in a car accident, by accident or not, who knows. And yeah, she still lives there in this house that is decorated exactly the way it was when her parents died. And our little blogger is invited to interview her. And Beth, who is the serial killer, wants to finally tell her story. And the only person that she'll tell it to is our little blogger friend. So we see her going into this mansion, which is so creepy and so atmospheric. And it's the house of someone who actually was convicted of those, the charges were dropped. She was kind of found guilty of, she was kind of guilty of killing people, and she still may or may not have killed those people. So, she's putting herself in a very dangerous situation because of her obsession with true crime and finding and just like solving all these cold cases. And that alone kind of makes it interesting. It is another it's like a dual POV book where we get the blogger's perspective and we get Beth's perspective. We also go back in time through the interview chapters where Beth recounts kind of her life story and the dynamic between her and her parents and their relationship, which is kind of toxic-ish. Yeah, it was kind of toxic. And her relationship with her mother. If you've read Daisy Darker, where is it? Like, if you've read Daisy Darker, it's pretty similar in terms of like the family dynamics, and well, it's not similar to Daisy Darker in terms of the plot. It's similar in that it talks about family dynamics and husbands and wives not getting along and how that affects the children and the children's relationship with their parents and how all of that kind of shapes a person's life. And those stories, those themes of the past having an impact on your present and your future, they kind of carry through the entire book. It's very spooky. It's almost supernatural and worldly in a very unapologetic way, where you have like cupboard doors flying open and just spooky things like house opening and closing all by itself, and just very almost like gothicness to it, that while I don't normally read like more supernatural spooky stuff, I found it really entertaining and could not put it down or press pause. So I basically listened to the audiobook in one sitting. And again, I would recommend it because the narrator just did such an amazing job, and they weaved in all these extra elements that kind of made you experience kind of the creepy, creaking atmosphericness of it all. So yeah, which is why I love listening to audiobooks, because it's kind of like those old radio dramas where you'd hear the door open or you'd hear the floors creak, and it adds an extra layer of enjoyment into the story that sometimes my imagination wouldn't do it all by itself. But yeah, I gave that one a 4 stars, and I really loved it. The characters were meh. They were okay. Like, Beth's character was pretty intriguing, and there's some other characters in the story that I'm not going to mention because I don't want to spoil anything. But the characters, for the most part, were pretty engaging and gripping, and I was really drawn into their stories, and I kind of believed their motivations and just their cold hearted messiness. If you've listened to any of my other 3 thriller or 3 audio reviews, you'll know that I kind of like messiness. I like a story with like messy, toxic characters who are unapologetically just done with the world and who just don't give any, whatever's about what people think about them, and they're just like, doing whatever. I like reading about those characters, and the Book of Cold Cases definitely delivered. It also has this beautiful cover that I liked looking at while I was listening to the audiobook. Anyway, yeah, I had a good time with all of these. They were pretty enjoyable. Well, that is it from me this time. Let me know in the comments what you have been watching, which audiobooks you've been listening to lately, or what you would recommend I read next. Until next time, you can have a look through my audiobook review playlist, and I will see you on the flip side. Bye.